Hello. Welcome to Talk with Jon here on Main Street Media, Utah. I am your host, Jon of Talk with Jon. Looking forward to being with you for the next roughly hour and a half. I'm going to be having our guest join us here momentarily. I'll introduce him as soon as he gets here. But first, thank you for joining us today. And the first thing I want to do is mention thank you for joining us on either through kmmu.org, mainstreetmedia.com. And when you go to mainstreetmedia.com or kmmu.org, it will take you to our landing page, which also has the tabs to click on X, YouTube, and Rumble. So please like and subscribe us. You know, it's not just Talk with Jon. It's also the Gowd Crowd. We also have the guys down in Political Head Trauma. So, they're in Twilla, talk about things here locally. As you know, I'm kind of more of a national show in general, but definitely we talk about Utah things and we touch base on Utah things. But joining us here momentarily, I'm going to be bringing on my guest. First, I want to give out the show mantra and the show prayer. First, the show prayer. I hope my show is a gift back to my forefathers, the founding fathers, and may it be an acceptable token to our Father above. Then the show mantra. Where there is liberty, there is the Spirit of Christ. Where the Spirit of Christ is, there will be liberty. And the greater the Spirit of Christ, the greater liberty will be. And boy, holy moly, do we need that in our country? And joining us now, oh boy, I did him dirty. Right as he was grabbing a drink of water. Oh well. He's human, folks. He's human. David Pine, the Deputy Executive Director of the EMP Task Force. Thank you for joining us. Let me, real quickly, folks, let's see. I do have, let me go for his bio real quickly. David T. Pine, Esquire, is a former U.S. Army Combat Arms and Headquarters staff officer who was in charge of armaments cooperation with the former Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and the Americas from 2000 to 2003. He has an MA in National Studies from Georgetown University. He's the former president and current deputy executive director of the Task Force on National and Homeland Security. He recently served as the defense and foreign policy advisor for former Republican presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy. He has also co-authored the best-selling new book, Catastrophe Now, America's Last Chance to Avoid an EMP Disaster. And his new book, Restoring Strategic Deterrence, will be published sometime here in 2026, if it's now not out already. And he serves as the editor of the Real War newsletter at dpyne.substack.com. That's D for David, Pine, pyne.substack.com. And he's been a previously served as a contributor to the National Interest. So, an extensive bio. We appreciate someone with his prestige and knowledge joining us here. And I appreciate the fact that I feel like I can call David Pine my friend. So, David, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Hey, Jon. Happy New Year, my friend.
Well, Happy New Year to you as well, my friend. And it definitely... Okay, so let's just... we've got a number of topics that we want to cover, but I do want to get into 2026. Definitely want to get, and I think I want to have you say what you think is going to happen this year. Give us your what you see coming down the path. You know, we in 2026 we may want to review it a little bit, but definitely these are the subjects that we talked about covering. First of all, we are absolutely going to hit your your two newsletters that you put out on the Real War newsletter on dpinesubstack.com. One from December 18th, Trump's revolutionary new national security strategy concedes end of U.S.-led liberal international order. And Trump prematurely, this was done on January 5th, Trump prematurely declares mission accomplished after overthrowing Maduro. And then these were some talking points that I wanted to hit with you, and that they are Minnesota fraud and the protests. So we're going to hit a little bit locally, and then internationally, Taiwan and what might be happening there. And does Trump's actions in Venezuela change the time frame of what might be happening between China and Taiwan, the taking of the oil tankers, Cuba, Mexico, and also Greenland, Denmark, and NATO? And then, as you can see, I also put what I put on the tweet today in this. So that's my that was my email of subjects that I wanted to cover with David. So let's talk a little bit about just give a little bit of looking into the future. I am really concerned. Let me share with you, David. I'm as concerned. I don't know if I'm maybe even more concerned about this year than I was when Biden got in 2021. John, why are you so concerned about that? John, don't you like a number of the things that President Trump is doing? Absolutely, I do. But one thing that President Trump is doing not a great job in my opinion, is messaging. His messaging really sucks right now. And we need him to have good messaging. We need to get his messaging better. And frankly, on top of that, I'm not really thrilled with the Republican support around him. I don't think they're doing a great job on messaging as well, to say, hey, look at the difference we've made between what we had in the Biden years versus now. And then I'm really concerned, kind of the blustering from Donald Trump. I'm a little worried about Greenland. I'm not even necessarily against the idea of Greenland becoming part of the United States. I just don't like how he's going about doing it. Kind of reflects back to what happened with Canada. We got a very socialist, almost socialist communist PM from Canada. All the numbers before the election, before Donald Trump got into office, was pointing towards a conservative leader in that role as prime minister. And because Donald Trump said, I'm going to make him the 51st state and wouldn't get off that, I actually think that he wound up the PM. We now have the PM in Canada as opposed to a conservative one. So I know that was a lot of blustering on my end. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that when President Biden was elected in November of 2020, and when he stole the election from President Trump, I predicted that he would likely be our last president. I was very concerned he would provoke World War III. I think he came close to doing that with Russia, but I'm even more concerned now. And I wasn't, if you had asked me in January of last year, I was very bullish about, the future. I thought President Trump was going to keep his promises up until I would say May. He was completely in line, early May, he was completely in line in his first 3.5 months of his administration, putting America first, trying to end wars, making a serious attempt to end the war in Ukraine. And nothing's really panned out. And with the exception of, war that began under Biden's tenure in Gaza, we have a partial ceasefire. Israel, I think, violates it every other day. But at least they're not terror bombing the civilians, so that's probably the most positive achievement that Trump has contributed to peace. Although his, Gaza Peace Board declarations, where he would serve as Gaza's new, whatever Grand Mufti or president, whatever you want to call him. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of strange, and I've openly speculated whether he plans to outstay his welcome after he leaves the presidency and remain in that role as chairman of the Gaza Peace Board as a de facto Gaza's leader. But I was listening to Lieutenant Colonel. Do you have a question?
Yes. What do you think? Do you think he's going to overstay his welcome? And real quickly, I am going to go. I'm going to black out my screen for just a minute. I need to make a few adjustments on my end, and then I will. But so I'm going to be here, and I'm going to be listening. So, but then I want to also hear what the general had to say.
Well, I think, yeah, I think he very well might stay past his presidency. It talks about him personally being the chairman of the Gaza Peace Board, not the president of the United States. So that's a little concerning. I mean, not that it's a huge deal. It just kind of amplifies the Democrats' criticisms of him as, talking like an autocrat and at least abroad acting like one. I certainly think he's less dictatorial than Joe Biden. I think that he's not weaponizing federal law enforcement against his enemies as Biden was. And certainly I think he's not doing enough in that regard in terms of going after corruption. But I was listening
I
to
definitely would concur with that last statement you made. I agree.
Yeah, I mean, there's been no arrests of all the Democrat criminals. I mean, President Biden, of course, committed all kinds of crimes. Bribery being the biggest one in terms of taking tens of billions of dollars of bribes. 51 billion that we know of in terms of his corrupt business deals with China and with other countries, even Russian mafia type folks. But I was listening to Lieutenant Colonel Dan Davis, who's one of my favorite podcasters, earlier today, and he played some sound bites with General Clark, where General Clark said that back in September of 2021, I think it was the September 20th of 2021, one of his subordinate generals, maybe a 2 or 3 star general at the Pentagon, said, "Hey, sir, I just found out that we're gonna attack 7 different countries." Well, first he said we're going to invade Iraq, and then a year later, he said, I guess around September 2022, he said, now the list is not just Iraq; it's gone up to 7 different countries that we're going to try to regime change, including Iran, and Syria, and Libya, and Somalia, and now we're seeing kind of a similar approach by President Trump, who got elected as an America First conservative president, ostensibly, at least that's what he campaigned on. But he's turned into John McCain slowly but surely, and you can see that with his bombing of Iran. I mean, granted, it was a one-day bombing, but there's no president of the United States has ever seriously considered bombing Iran until President Trump. And that's not something that America First conservatives should be supportive of, especially with it being a nuclear power as ISS, or even if you don't think it's a nuclear power, even if you think it's just a very strong cyber power that could destroy all U.S. critical infrastructure with cyber attacks alone. So I do think, I share a lot of your concerns. I think about that. On Greenland, I think I would take a different tack. I think President Trump is right on with Greenland. I think Greenland is the reason it's an exception for me is, it's a very strategic territory that would provide, enhance our ability to provide national security missile defense for the U.S. People have said, it helps control the straits between Greenland, Iceland, and the UK. I don't think that's a real concern. Preventing the Russia's Northern Fleet submarines and ships from getting out, unless we're openly entertaining war with Russia, as I think President Biden did. So Greenland, I think, is a good case where I would welcome the use of U.S. military power. And one of the reasons that I think we should invade and occupy it is that it would help end NATO. NATO is really just been a millstone around America's neck, threatening to drag the U.S. into a potential nuclear war with Russia over Ukraine or the Baltic states or any Eastern European country, none of which have any bearing whatsoever to do with U.S. national security interests. So I think that would be a win-win to be able to essentially become the second largest country, overtake Canada in terms of territory, have those strategic minerals. We could pay each of the Greenlandic citizens. We could pay them 100,000 each. That would just be 5.5 billion, I think. So they would benefit financially. They would also benefit in terms of the same rights that we would give U.S. citizens. I think that we should give them Commonwealth status to preserve their self-rule, much like Puerto Rico. I think Puerto Rico has benefited amazingly from that. They wouldn't have to pay taxes. They get all the benefits except for representation in Congress, essentially voting representation. Of course, I think they have some kind of delegates or representatives, but they can't vote. So I think that would be the best solution, and I'd love to see Denmark and UK and all those pitiful countries try to fight us. They're just like barking poodles. They just they're all bark and no bite. They don't have any military forces aside from 500 UK and British and French nukes, which of course they would never use against us. But I think it would really liberate us from our empire status. I'd much rather see us have imperial actions in terms of the Western Hemisphere and extricate us from the Eurasian supercontinent, because we can be an imperialist power in our own hemisphere without any threat to U.S. national security. But by facing off with Russia and China with disputes over Ukraine and Taiwan that they consider nuclear red lines for them, we risk the entire destruction of the United States of America.
Okay, so here is how he's going about doing the messaging with Greenland is where I have the biggest issue with Donald Trump. It's how he's going about doing the messaging and what he's making it sound like. If he was leading with so he is talking about strategic concerns, and so I'm probably going to read a little bit of a text of another individual that I've had on my show a few times, who is completely, he thinks he's like, Donald Trump is the biggest narcissist we've ever had. In his verbiage, it's like he is the worst human being ever, the most evil. He's saying that the military should rise up, and even Donald Trump has gone rogue. Trump has got, so this is an actual one of the sentences from him. This is very serious. Trump has gone rogue on us. Trump says that nothing can change his mind but his own mortality. He's calling him, a cheater, a friend of pedophiles and stuff like that. And I'm like, maybe. And the statement that I would have to this individual and others that want to say, well, Donald Trump has hung out with pedophiles. I hate to tell you this, folks, but most likely, if you have more than a couple hundred friends in your life, there's a pedophile or two amongst them. Just my life experiences has taught me that, and frankly, didn't even know. Didn't know these individuals, right? That was happening in their lives. But so where am I going with that? He is totally against the Greenland. He in Greenland and Venezuela are the two big shining beacons for him of how much of a rogue dictator, narcissist, every terrible name that you can give him, that Donald Trump is. And so this is one thing that I just don't think he's listening to is there strategic need for us to have Greenland, or is it just a big takeover of their minerals and everything along those lines? So from what I heard you just say a few minutes ago, no, there is strategic need, there is strategic concern. Michael Letts, who I've had on, and we've done a panel discussion. In fact, I'd really like to do a panel discussion with you and he in the very near future. Both you and he have said, there is strategic need for Greenland, and that the Muslims that Muslims and China are starting to make inroads in Greenland. What are your thoughts there?
Well, first of all, I agree with your unnamed friend that Trump is the biggest narcissist we've seen. I mean, certainly Obama was, but he just wasn't blatant about it. Obama was
Okay,
well known as a narcissist.
can I disagree and agree at the same time? Here's the
Sure.
thing with Donald Trump, and here's the thing with here's the thing we've had with every other president on up to this point. I'm going to tell people you have no idea how big a narcissist most of your elected officials are, or many, way more than 50%. I'm going to say somewhere in the neighborhood of 80 to 90% are narcissists. What happens in our political system typically is someone starts as a state representative, or becomes a congressperson, a senator, a governor, and then gets somehow in the State Department or something like that, and then becomes president of the United States. That is the history of the president of the United States. Since Teddy Roosevelt or something. I'm trying to think if the last president really was like Donald Trump. So John, well, who cares? What's your point? My point is, you're taught the lessons. You can't just come out and say the things. One of the things that people love about Donald Trump is he says exactly what's on his mind. He gives it to you pretty straight. Now, his mind changes from week to week, maybe on different things, but you're hearing what he's saying. What we had, who I think is the biggest narcissist of all time, was probably Obama and possibly Joe Biden. Now, Joe Biden, by the time he became president, was starting to lose his bloody mind. So probably wasn't the biggest narcissist. But if you were to know what George Bush was behind closed doors, if you were to know what the vast majority, and that's George Herbert Walker Bush, you would see how big a narcissist almost every single how big of a narcissist I think all of our presidents have been. LBJ, in my opinion, he may not have pulled the trigger, but he was sure darn happy and probably part of the process of getting the trigger pulled when it came to JFK. So here with Donald Trump, he just never has needed to be political in his statements. In fact, it served him in business on the exact opposite, to make sure that he was so brash and bombastic. Okay, so forgive me, David.
Yeah, I mean, I think President Trump, he's not just a narcissist, but he's a bully, and he's a bully to his own allies. I mean, look what he did to Marjorie Taylor Greene. He drove her out of Congress. She had reported like 800 death threats or threats of violence against her and her family, and decided to put her family first by retiring a year in advance, and that's really hurt President Trump's Republican majority in the House. It's down to 218. I mean, I don't think it's. I haven't seen it that low, maybe ever in my lifetime. The last time it was 218 that I remember was, I think, 1918. Around that time, 1921. So, it's a very fragile Republican majority. We're going to lose it in a blue wave disastrously in the November elections. Very likely lose the Senate. There's a chance we could eke out a 50-50 Senate with J.D. Vance breaking the tie. But, I think chances are likely against that. And it's, most of that in Trump's defense is not due to his actions. It's due to just the historical mean, essentially. We usually lose the party in power usually loses 4 Senate seats and about 24, I think, to 35 House seats. But I think Trump's losses, at least in the House, are likely to well exceed that, probably be on the order of about 40 House seats and maybe five Senate seats. So it's going to be a tough 2 years after those elections starting in January. He's going to get impeached again. Maybe a good charges this time in terms of him acting in an unconstitutional manner, bombing 7 different countries while claiming to, that he deserves the Nobel Peace Prize. And of course, essentially, pressuring Machado in Venezuela to surrender it to him and to try to appease him. So he'll install her as, Venezuela's puppet leader, I guess, in it's U.S. backed.
The
But
smartest thing he could have ever done was just say, I appreciate you wanting to honor me that way, but this is your peace prize. Please, you keep it. That would have been the smartest move he could have ever have made.
well, it was at his suggestion that she gave it to him, and he's got pictures like as if it's an award, and he deserved it, and the Nobel Peace Prize said you can't transfer a peace prize. I mean, you can't transfer. It's just absurd, and the whole that's that combined with his statement that he's not bound by any moral or international law or biblical law. He's only bound by whatever his own thoughts, whatever his own whatever he said, that it's his own limitations that he sets for himself, his own thought, his own thinking. So I mean that those are, if you want to remember think about what's wrong with Trump, like what's the worst about Trump, that one statement says it all, is that he's not bound by any godly law or international law or U.S. law or the Constitution. He's spurned the Constitution in invading Venezuela. There was a war powers resolution. There were 5 Republicans in the Senate that voted in support of that to prevent him from attacking Venezuela, with a direct military strike without explicit U.S. congressional authorization. I thought that was a really good thing to do. I was surprised that Senator Mike Lee voted against it, and as did, of course, John Curtis. But that was a really great thing, and Trump basically said, "Hey, we're going to kick those 5 Senate Republicans out of the Senate." Just like he opposed Massey and Boebert and all the good Republican House members. I think there was a list of 4 or 5, including Marjorie Taylor Greene, that opposed him on the Epstein list, and called for them to be taken out in the primaries. So he talks America first sometimes. Sometimes you can't tell if you got to close your eyes and you just saw the words on the paper, you'd wonder if it's Bush or McCain. So as you said, he just kind of bounces around. He has no filter. He says whatever he thinks, and sometimes he's channeling John McCain, and sometimes he's trying to channel Ronald Reagan. And of course, we all commend him when he channels Ronald Reagan or George Washington or someone like that. And even when he, actually supports the Monroe Doctrine, or that has this amazing national security strategy, which he published, which essentially recognizes that, it basically states that regime change wars are a bad idea. And Pete Hegseth stated that, I think, as recently as like April. And of course, now everyone, all the, his cabinet members, or except for J.D. Vance and Tulsi Gabbard, I think, are on board with the whole regime change operations. But there hasn't been any regime change in Venezuela. He did a kidnapping or a snatch and grab of Venezuelan dictator Maduro, but the Maduro regime remains completely in power. There's no democracy. It's communist still. They control everything. They control the military. They control every ministry, every cabinet post. The presidency, of course. All of which remain communist, firmly allied with Russia and China. So, he didn't accomplish anything. And honestly, if he had done the exact same thing, gone in there and done a one-day bombing strike and kidnapping, and that had resulted in a revolution that overthrew the communist regime, I would be applauding him. So it's not that I oppose the use of military force. It's that I believe that it should only be conducted if there's a reasonable chance of success. And something that's achievable, and President Trump has achieved basically nothing in Venezuela.
So here's my okay, so another thing that I think happens with Donald Trump is the deep state is totally against so many of the things that he does. The when you said, if he could have had so my understanding, what I've heard from people who have actually lived in Venezuela, I since right after Maduro was taken out, I spoke with people that told me they had family members in Venezuela that told them there were many people out in support of Donald Trump taking out Maduro. That was quashed by the roving gangs. And I go, how much was the CIA going against Donald Trump and preventing what you had just spoken about, where you would have supported us taking out Maduro, where the people in the streets come out and support? I think the CIA completely worked against him on that, and the deep state did as well. That's my thoughts. What do you think?
Well, that's an interesting statement you just made because reports indicate the CIA was strongly encouraging President Trump to keep, their current president, interim president, Delcy Rodriguez, in power. They believe that she is. They thought the chances of, Democratic opposition leaders overthrowing the Venezuelan military and government were next to nil, and so they thought, she seems a little bit more free market oriented, more business oriented. She seems like a dictator we can work with. Of course, Maduro was, he was going out of his way to offer us a, sweetheart deal, saying he would step down from power, allow democratic elections. We just needed to let him control the military as defense minister. So we'd have kind of a switch where he would become defense minister instead of the current one, and then have new elections, and of course. It would be essentially a coalition government between, Democrat non-communist officials that were democratically elected and Maduro himself. And we would be able to have all these oil contracts and basically everything that Trump said, except, of course, he wanted Maduro's head on a plate. He wanted, him to be in prison in New York on false charges of.
And why send him to New York? Why send him to New York? Why not send him to Florida?
Well, yeah, I mean, New York, the Southern District of New York is the exact same venue where he was wrongly prosecuted on false charges, trumped up charges by the Biden administration. So, he's essentially doing the same thing to Maduro on false charges.
I could see Maduro wind up walking. I could see why Maduro wind up walking because it's in New York.
Yeah, it's very possible, and I honestly would welcome that. So what I've stated, and I think I stated it in my last article that I published on January 5th, is that the U.S. should be, horse trading. We should trade Maduro for another sweetheart deal. Have the communists step down from power. The current defense minister who's allied with Maduro can stay in power of the military, but that's basically the best deal we can get without invading. And I don't think it's worth the lives of thousands of U.S. soldiers for us to invade. I think that threatens to be, not a Vietnam scale conflict, but it's certainly, the country is, I think it's 83% larger than Ukraine. It's got the same population, and Russia has a much stronger military than we do in terms of their army and in terms of their proximity to Ukraine. And of course, they could defeat Ukraine in a month if they wanted to, if Putin gave the order by invading Kyiv from Belarus. But nevertheless, they've been fighting a war for 4 years that's cost them 156,000 Russian soldiers lives. And, we don't have any troops. We have zero troops, according to the Department of War. We have zero troops on the ground in Venezuela. So we can't do anything to control them. We can't overthrow the government. The best thing we can do is to do another sweetheart deal. We say Maduro can never hold any public office. He can be the party leader, but he can't be in government and or the military. And I think that would be the best way to put America first in this instance.
So let's just jump right into what you had in your piece, and let me pull that up. Trump permanently declares mission accomplished after overthrowing Maduro. Let's see. The trumped up claim that Maduro is a drug kingpin is one of your points. Another one is mission accomplished ? And an operation success, but a strategic failure.
And then Trump claims U.S. will run Venezuela. I think that was another thing that was a terrible misstep by President Trump. Trump threatens worse consequences for Venezuela's new president. So let's get into your article with Maduro. And then I'm also curious I want to hear a little bit about your thoughts on the supposedly on what happened with the strike, and if you think that that has uh, raised any eyebrows at the very least with Trump, or excuse me, with China and with Putin and Russia.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that the way that the U.S. deposed Maduro sets a very bad precedent because essentially we're saying is we can flout international law, we can flout the U.S. Constitution, we can overthrow and kidnap any head of state in the world for any reason on trumped up charges based on lies, if whatever president feels like it, and of course that could apply to China, to Taiwan. They could kidnap Taiwanese President Lai tomorrow, and maybe some of his close associates, and then have get in league with the KMT to overthrow the government and install a KMT president who supports unification, or at least minimally good relations with China, and say, yeah, that was fully justified because that's what the U.S. did to Venezuela. So we're just following the U.S. example. If the U.S. is the leader of the free world, then we should
Same with
follow their lead.
Ukraine as well.
Exactly. I mean, Putin could, if Putin wanted Zelensky dead, he'd be dead by now. Spetsnaz are some of the best special forces in the world. Of course, the U.S. has better special forces than they do, but they're probably the second best. They could do a snatch and grab somehow, maybe not in Ukraine, maybe somewhere else. They could assassinate him. They could, have one of their agents plant some poison on him that causes him to die violently, and after he returns home, all kinds of stuff. So it's a bad example. It sets a bad precedent constitutionally. It sets a bad precedent internationally. I think
Okay,
that
so let me ask you this about some of the more technical aspects of how we went in with apparently it was Delta Force, how supposedly there was these sound weapons and the coordinated attack. Does that give pause for Russia or China on their time frame for attacks, do you think, especially China on Taiwan?
Well, Russia and China, of course, have, and even Iran have, and North Korea, they all have cyber attack is essentially day one. They could take down all U.S. critical infrastructure on day one of the conflict. So, the U.S. Certainly demonstrated some, amazing cyber warfare capabilities. Reportedly, um, you know, essentially their whole radars, their defense system, alert system got turned off. We also reportedly had a high-level CIA mole. I think that's very likely that helped assist in that operation. And then, of course, you mentioned that there was a story by one eyewitness reportedly that some U.S. drones showed up, and there was like some kind of sonic weapon that was used to disable all the soldiers. I think there were I can't remember how many soldiers, but at least 200 were disabled. We had reportedly, some say 20, I think it was 80 is the more accurate number of reports. 80 U.S. Delta Force soldiers came in, did the kidnapping of Maduro and his wife. By the way, why was his wife kidnapped? His wife has nothing to do with anything that Maduro was doing. And of course, Maduro is not a drug lord. If you do some hard, it doesn't take long to figure out based on DEA reports that Venezuela is a big player in the U.S. drug industry. In terms of U.S. drug deaths, only 2% are accountable to Venezuelan drugs versus about 75% for Mexico and China. So if he was really was concerned about drugs, he would have invaded Mexico and China and attacked them and tried to, steal their, kidnap their leaders, and not Venezuela. So it really has nothing to do with drugs. And my biggest problem with what Trump did in Venezuela is not the actual attack, is that he's lied about everything. He's lied about we achieved regime change. We overthrew the communist regime. We installed U.S. puppet leaders. We're in control. We have troops there. I mean, literally, I was listening to the after action reports, starting from his very first press conference the following day, and I was just like, that's a lie. I mean, just lie after lie. And the one thing I hate the most is having a president of the United States that lies to the American people. And you just can't trust it. Even what his cabinet members were saying, I'm like, that's probably a lie, as well. So I talked to my parents, who are strong supporters of President Trump, and of course, I remain a supporter. Much less, a lot less of a supporter, I think, now than I was a year ago, but nominally still a supporter, because I do think he's doing a lot of good here at home, domestically. Although I think his foreign policy has been pretty bad overall. He has a lot of potential. I mean, he could just like he flipped to be in a neocon in May, he could flip back. He could say, oh, this neocon stuff's not working out. Regime change stuff's not working out. Let's go back to America first. Let's, forget Zelensky and sign a peace deal with Putin that he could sign in a single day. I mean, they've had agreements on the table, essentially, that could have ended the war, as recently as August or maybe even October. And he's been dissuaded from signing those by, Secretary of State Rubio, of course, is a ardent neocon and Russia hater, who's been, really tried to sabotage the whole peace process, trying to, the 20-point peace plan that the U.S. has currently with Russia was essentially handwritten by Zelensky himself. I mean, it's just ridiculous, and Russia has outright rejected it. I think Putin rejected it. I think the day after we kidnapped Maduro.
Well, folks, can I tell you one reason why I like David Pine so much? Is how I made the comment of the CIA going against Donald Trump, and he just very nicely said, "Sit down, talk with John. You're an idiot, and let me set you straight." And he was so good at it. I want to tell you, it was so nice.
No, it's not what I said at all. I found a lot of common sense and agreement with you. I just maybe I didn't express that in a way that was understandable to your viewers.
Well, let me put it this way. The bottom line is, I bring on you and other guests because of your expertise and understanding. And so that's why I want you there. And I try to be kind of a vocal mouthpiece for our listeners. I try to ask some of the questions that they've thought of, hopefully some questions they haven't thought of, but boy, they'd like some answers to. And so, that's why I bring you on virtually every month, except we missed last month. But the bottom line is, I bring you on because of your understanding of geopolitics and what's happening around the world, and how all the different minutia pieces fit in, and how one affects the other. Because what we did in Venezuela, as you said, China and Russia are watching. So let's get into let's hit your December piece and go, have you totally changed your mind on what you wrote in December with Donald Trump? Trump's revolutionary new national security strategy concedes end of the US-led liberal international order. You had your you've got my proposed strat. So one of the listed sections is my proposed strategy of assured national survival, Trump's national security strategy. Then here some key points and provisions for our 2025 national security strategy. And let's see, I'm scrolling through Trump's new pivot to Asia, why Trump might have decided to soften the language on China in the NSS, national security strategy. So want your thoughts on this one. Have your thoughts changed since you wrote this piece with Donald Trump?
No, I think that in fact my next piece that I'm hoping to write the next few days, publish, is all about is it really a continuation of that December article? It talks about how the Trump national security strategy, and I believe the national defense strategy, which is way overdue. Was supposed to be last month, and then it's supposed to be first week of the January, but it's due any day now. Really focuses and provides a blueprint or roadmap on how the U.S. can return, transform itself from an empire back to a republic. I often describe the U.S. as an imperial republic because we're both a republic and an empire, much like France after Napoleon III was overthrown following the Franco-Prussian War. Where we have a democratically elected president, but we're also an empire, and we have kind of vast global, not territories, but vassal states, essentially. In terms imperial protectorates, I sometimes refer them to Ukraine, Taiwan, Israel isn't. I think maybe we're probably a vassal state of Israel in terms of the way Trump governs the United States foreign policy in the Middle East. And we should talk about Iran too, because that's probably one of the scariest, probably the scariest thing for me that's going on right now. But no, I think President Trump and Pete Hegseth, and of course Undersecretary of War Elbridge Colby deserve an amazing amount of credit for providing a national security strategy document that doesn't talk about democracy promotion, which I actually like if it's peaceful. It doesn't talk about regime change wars. It refocuses like a laser on U.S. Dominance of the Western Hemisphere, which of course the Maduro operation was ostensibly an act to promote. Greenland, of course, also an execution of that strategy. The Panama Canal, any operations we do against Cuba, all those could be good things if they're done in the right way that I would strongly support. But it also talks about de-emphasizing U.S. military forces and in the Middle East and in Europe. Essentially relying on Israel to provide regional security in the Middle East upon our European allies. I don't even call them allies anymore because they don't act like U.S. allies. I call them frenemies. Our frenemies in NATO that are threatening war with the U.S. over Greenland. That could be our future enemies. Are that they need to have responsibility for defense against Russia. We should pull out all our. It doesn't say this, but essentially it implies, and actually, the Trump administration has told the Europeans that by 2027 they want them to take over essentially the air and ground defense security role in Europe.
By what year?
2027. So
Amen. Amen.
Yeah. So in less than 2 years, they would have majority. Obviously they do now. They have more ground and air forces than the U.S. does in Europe, but I would say almost exclusive, responsibility for that. And then we would refocus and redeploy our troops to the Western Hemisphere and while augmenting our forces in the Western Pacific as well to guard against potential Chinese aggression.
Do we need to be worried about China and Russia getting a foothold in Greenland? I know I've asked this before, but I want to come back to it and make sure I have a clear understanding. One, and then two, I heard someone with this thought process. They said they wonder if Donald Trump is doing what he's doing with Greenland to actually get us kicked out of NATO. Now I'm like, I don't think Donald Trump is that strategic, but I'm like, hey, I wouldn't be opposed to that happening.
Well, that's as I stated. That's why I'm so in love with the idea of the U.S. Occupying Greenland. Occupying the capital and basically kicking our frenemies out of Greenland. I think that would cause the collapse of NATO because then they could Denmark could invoke Article 5 against the U.S. and Trump would say, okay, we're done with NATO. Consider us gone today. And there's nothing more America
Do you think that is a
first than
strategy
that.
that he's actually considering?
I think that he doesn't, I think he doesn't care that much about NATO. He bounces back and forth, of course, in I think 2017 and 18, maybe even 2019. We know that on 2 occasions with John Bolton present, he stated that the U.S. should withdraw from NATO. He wanted the U.S. out. Of course, Bolton and other deep staters in his first cabinet told him that was a bad idea. But that's really the key. I mean, more than anything else, I can't think of a single other thing that would transform the U.S. back from an empire to a republic than pulling out of NATO. It just really
Why?
is very key.
Why would that be the case? Not
NATO,
disagreeing. I'm just saying, why would that be the case?
so NATO is, consists of 30 European, U.S. vassal states essentially. Well, they used to be vassal states. Now they're becoming frenemies. With UK and France and Germany all opposing Trump's every move to peace with Russia, opposing him on multiple fronts. Of course, clamping down on their political opposition in authoritarian fashion. Throwing Christians that pray silently in an abortion clinic, in prison, Facebook posts, whatever it is, debanking conservatives, so they're acting in the very ways that they accuse Putin of doing in Russia. And maybe they're right, but they're essentially adopting Putin's methods. As Zelensky, of course, I think is more of a dictator, more totalitarian than Putin ever has been. And we're claiming he's a Democrat. So, we are, back in February, Vice President Vance gave a wonderful speech that really irritated the heck out of European leaders. I call them EU Politburo leaders, in which he talked about the need to essentially liberate Europe from the whole authoritarian philosophy, which bans opposition parties, brands them as conservative nationalists, as terrorists, and attacks Christians. And that's really what we should be doing. We should be using the CIA to peacefully get our allies, pro-Trump nationalist allies, elected across the world, especially in Europe. And with nationalists in power like Viktor Orban, with the new president in Hungary, the new president of the Czech Republic, I think it's, I want to say Fico in Slovakia. I could be wrong about that. Robert Fico.
Your guess is much better than mine.
Yeah, I think it's Robert Fico. He was shot, of course, by Ukrainian extremists, Ukrainian supporter, because he was opposed aid to Ukraine. Almost killed. So those are 3 leaders. Meloni in Italy is actually, she's really championing a EU peace overture to Russia, direct meetings with President Putin. So we're seeing some change there. Meloni's kind of shifted from being a neocon to more of a nationalist in the last few months. So that's very encouraging. But, in terms of UK, France, and Germany, all of those leaders are neocons, neoliberals, basically Biden clones, completely worthless. And, the U.S. should do everything. The U.S. should ignore them. The U.S. should never meet with Zelensky, refuse to meet with Macron or Starmer in England, or Merz in Germany, and say that, unless they change their policies and support peace and support U.S. foreign policy, principally with regards to Russia and Ukraine, ending that senseless war, we have nothing to talk about.
Well, okay, so here's another. I want to get your thoughts a little bit more on this. Would you suggest we pull out of, we've got a bunch of naval base, much more Air Force bases and some Army bases over in Europe and in the Middle East. Would you just say we completely pull all of our stuff out? All of our, we're going to have to leave the buildings and so forth there, and the runways and so forth, right? But as far as get the rest, our helicopters, our everything else, should we just pull that all back to the United States or pull it out of Europe? What should we do as far as getting ourselves out of these areas? What would you suggest?
Well, we currently have 100,000 troops in Europe. There's really no need for those troops. There hasn't been a need since the Soviet Union, unilaterally surrendered its entire empire of 20 captive nations. Russia's no Russian leader, including President Putin, has made any real attempt to try to restore its empire. A few border adjustments in Ukraine doesn't really qualify. He's had the ability to conquer the entire country and has chosen not to. He won't even capture Kharkiv, which is 50 miles from Russian territory, which is the second largest city in Ukraine. So it's very clear. And he withdrew. A lot of people think the Russian army is a joke. Well, if that's true, how did they, conduct a successful blitzkrieg of Ukraine and have their troops surround Kyiv on two different sides within 2 miles of city limits? Forcing Zelensky to make a tentative peace deal with the Istanbul Agreement, which would have ended the war on April 9th of 2022. I mean, if Putin hadn't pulled those troops back, they never would have left. They would have partially surrounded the city of Kyiv, probably completed that encirclement, and Kyiv might be part of Russia now. So. That was a decision that was the turning point for me. When I saw Putin do that, I'm like, he's not trying to take over Ukraine, because there's no leader in the world that would do that. It showed that he was, I would say, a little bit naive, believing that peace overture would be widely accepted and acclaimed in Western circles. Instead, we made up excuses and said, oh, it's just a redeployment. And it was a redeployment. But it's the capital region that Russian troops withdrew from, and really three different, much more strategic provinces, I would argue, than southeastern Ukraine from the standpoint of actually getting Ukraine to surrender. And he withdrew those troops unilaterally. Hitler. A lot of people realize that, but Hitler offered to Churchill to withdraw from 81% of German-occupied Europe in exchange for peace and a free-handed deal with the Soviet Union, and that included all German troops from France and the Low Countries and Denmark and Norway and Greece and Yugoslavia, and even restore a Polish state that would be essentially a German puppet state. And so, it's not abnormal. And of course, Stalin withdrew all Soviet troops from a number of countries. From Denmark, he had Soviet troops in Denmark. He had Soviet troops in Austria, and I think one other country. Of course, other countries that were communist, he withdrew troops from. And he even his successor, Khrushchev, even offered to join NATO in 1954. So. And Stalin offered to withdraw from East Germany. So it's not unusual for a dictator to offer to withdraw from countries as part of a peace deal. But certainly when Putin made that measure, it should have been clear to any non-biased observer like myself that he's anything but a new Hitler, and he was quite sincere in wanting peace, unlike EU leaders and, of course, Zelensky himself.
Another thing that kind of, when I hear these EU leaders, especially over in UK, I want to say, I can't remember the exact verbiage that they've used, but the head of the EU, and I want to say the UK premier, talk about, well, tariffs is not the way that you treat placing tariffs on your friends is not the way you treat your friends. I'm like, well, what have you guys been doing to the United States for the last longer than I've been alive, since the 50s? You've basically got tariffs on the United States. There's a reason why there's not a lot of Ford trucks and Chevy trucks running around in Europe and in Great Britain. It's because you guys put tariffs and restrictions on us selling our vehicles over there. But yet you love being in the U.S. markets. So when I heard that, I was like, okay, that's a bunch of, well, maybe you don't like them there. You don't like us getting Greenland. I'm going to go, it's a hollow statement to me. Um, any other thoughts? And because we're at 5:30. Um, you know, I think having you on for what's happening in Europe, what's happening with Greenland is huge. But there are some other things that I'd like to hit. I'd like to get your thoughts on what's happening in here domestically, but also want to get your thoughts with Cuba, with what we may be seeing in Mexico. I'm going to go back to my statement of Donald Trump, his his bombastic, narcissistic nature caused us to have a PM in Canada that is, uh-oh.
You there?
Yes, hold on for just a second, Dave. All right, there we go. Got you back. I'm not exactly sure what happened, but glad you're back with us. So it must have been a hiccup on my end or something along those lines. So where was I at? I want to get your go ahead.
You were talking about tariffs and Cuba, and
I was talking about tariffs. So I'll let you have any other thoughts that you want to mention on tariffs, but I was also going Trump and his bombastic nature about the PM up in Canada, how making Canada the 51st state and so forth, and doing it as much as he did, got the communist socialist communist PM instead of a conservative one. And now we've got China with police stations up in Canada. We actually have some. They're making Canada is being very friendly with China, and we know that fentanyl has come in from Canada. So my concern is, what about Mexico? What about Canada? What about Cuba? And then also the taking of the oil tankers that has happened, and also want to get into Minnesota. So those are areas that I want to cover with you. I want to get your thoughts on the Taiwan, China, Taiwan, because October passed, but we're looking at April, May coming up. So want to hit all those other things, but I'm going to let you finish up on what's going on with Europe and if there's anything else we haven't covered.
yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think that Trump's bombastic rhetoric, I mean, it was really just embarrassing, calling Canada the 51st state. I mean, it's the second largest country in the world. It's got, 40 plus million citizens or subjects. I don't know if I think it's Canadian citizens. They're part of the British Commonwealth. They have, I mean, I guess they're subjects.
I would say it's subjects to the British Crown, because if Parliament ever does anything that the British Crown doesn't want, he can't, by law, he can just do away with British Parliament and get a new one in.
Yeah, I don't know about that, but certainly their head of state, their actual head of state is King Charles III, and so they're Canadian subjects, I guess. Trump essentially affected regime change in the wrong direction, not just in Canada, but in Greenland as well. So in Canada, when he started talking about making Canada the 51st state and calling Prime Minister Trudeau a governor. At that point, the Canadian, I don't know if it's the Tories or whatever the conservative opposition to the Labor government were in the lead. I mean, they were poised to retake control of the government. And thanks to President Trump, there was a kind of a rally around the flag effect where the nationalists, moved from the conservative side and started backing the liberals because, the conservative leaders in Canada were trying to excuse Trump's language and say, oh, he's an ally. He's just making, saying nonsense, but, he's really with us. And there was no evidence that was the case. And he was just really derogatory to Canadians. And, Canada's not like a minor territory like Greenland that has 56,000 citizens. It's got, a large population and, more territory than the United States of America. So That's not the way you treat an ally unless there's, you're provoked to, like the way that EU countries treat us. But of course, as you mentioned, Canada, under their new socialist premier, is cozying up to China, basically saying the U.S. is not a reliable trading partner, so we're going to welcome communist China to replace the U.S. as our main trading partner. Not to that extent, but essentially that's the movement that we're seeing. And then in Greenland,
that's what you're picking up what he's putting down, in my opinion.
yeah. And then in Greenland, the previous premier of Greenland was pro-independence, and now he got replaced with a pro Danish, Kingdom of Denmark prime minister that's parroting everything that the Danish prime minister is saying. So, we had an opportunity to kind of negotiate maybe behind the scenes with the old Greenlandic premier or prime minister. And we squandered that, and there was a backlash, and they elected someone who opposes independence. So that's what we have to deal with right now. Now, of course, that's not a deal breaker because it would only take half an hour essentially for us to occupy the capital of Greenland, and we could do that in short order. They have essentially no army. I mean, it's not as bad as Trump said. We're saying that Denmark sent a couple dog sleds to increase their security. They have more forces than that, but not a lot, probably in the hundreds, I would say, Danish troops out of a military that's probably about 20,000 strong, that's mostly deployed, of course, in Denmark. So that would be, if Trump wants a military victory, that's really the place to go. Forget about Iran. And I want to talk about that next. But, all this posturing in Iran where he's deploying I think the USS Abraham Lincoln, redeploying that carrier from the South China Sea to the Indian Ocean. He's deployed, the exact same forces that were used to bomb Iran during the 12-day war. He's redeployed those. There's been all kinds, he's talking about how, if Iran doesn't stop killing the protesters, then he's going to, bomb the crap out of them, essentially. But thankfully, and so there's, as your viewers know, there's been 1 million Iranians that are taking the streets out of a population of 90+ million that have protested for freedom against the Islamist regime. And of course, we support them. We should not support them with direct military strikes because Iran could take down our country in a hot minute with no warning in terms of cyber attack or super EMP attack. But I think that we could give them weapons. I don't think we should, but I think we could. That's probably the most help we could give them without provoking a massive Iranian retaliation. I don't think it would really do any good. They have no chances of overthrowing the Iranian regime. And again, we hear all the neocons like Lindsey Graham saying, "Oh yeah, we took down the communists in Venezuela. We can do it in Iran." And they're just parroting Israeli talking points. Of course, I've always opposed the Iranian regime. I think they're a terrorist regime. I think they supported Al Qaeda, but at this point they really they're not looking for war with the U.S. and they're not going to attack the U.S. unless they're provoked. And the problem with all these folks that support all these wars, all of Trump's wars and Biden's wars, is they don't understand that the way to provoke the destruction of the United States and actually greatly increase the security threat to the U.S. is by fighting all these different countries. Because as we know, when we were minding our own business before World War II, with the exception of World War I, we didn't really have any enemies. We had certainly Japan was a challenge, but of course it was FDR that cut off their oil and provoked them to attack the U.S. when they were offering sweetheart deals, peace deals to FDR in terms of withdrawing Japanese troops from Indochina, pulling out of part of southern China, and requesting the U.S. mediate a final peace deal ending the Sino-Japanese War, the Second Sino-Japanese War. And FDR just told them to pound sand, like Biden did when Putin offered not to invade Ukraine if he just did a written guarantee that Russia or that Ukraine would never join NATO. So The U.S. is actually the author. U.S. leaders are the author of all of our own problems, and Russia, of course, is an enemy of our own making because Putin himself is he wanted to join NATO twice in 2000 and 2002. As he stated during his interview with Tucker Carlson in February of 2024, just 2 years ago. And, both Bush and Clinton rejected those overtures. So, we could be allies with the most powerful nuclear superpower on the planet. And China would be, much more reluctant to cross us if we had Russia as a military ally. But we simply can't see past our own hatred, of our own hatred of Russia and other countries. Of course, there's reason to view China as an enemy. They're communists. Venezuela's communists, Nicaragua and Cuba, and of course, I'd love to see Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela freed from communist rule. Obviously, no one's ever going to free China from communist rule. I think that's permanent, and we need to concede that. But we need to have a policy of peaceful coexistence with our enemies, especially the ones that have the ability to destroy the U.S., because that's really the key, even more, I think, than increasing our military budget to establishing real security for the United States. And of course, you may have seen that Trump has proposed increasing the size of our military budget anywhere from 50 to 66% to 1.5 trillion, which would probably is about the size of the Chinese military budget on a purchase power parity basis. But there's just no need for that. We could withdraw our troops from Europe and save 100 billion a year and invest that in missile defense, the Golden Dome, hardening the U.S. critical infrastructure, the grid against EMP attack and cyber attack, and we would be able to secure our country far better.
Well, let's get to Iran. What do you think? And you've touched on it a little bit. What do we need to do there?
Oh, well, I think Iran offered us a deal on their nuclear weapons. It was a 5-point plan. It was not very reported on, but they offered much of what the Trump administration was requesting. Was not a total ban on centrifuges, but in terms of enrichment, would have limited it to, I think, 3% or 3.6, something like that, compared to like 60% that they essentially are doing now, or probably 90%, because I believe they do have nuclear weapons. But what is the rationale for bombing Iran? I mean, Iran is not trying to attack us. They have not directly attacked the United States. So essentially, what we're doing is we're doing it on the basis because they're killing up to 20,000 of their citizens that are protesting. That is not a vital, that is not a rationale that is defensible on a national security basis. And if Iran was a tiny country like Grenada, I'd say, fine, we can do that. Reagan invaded Grenada. I think they had, 100,000 or less citizens. It was a cakewalk. There was 600, 800 enemy troops, including some Cubans. And it was over in essentially 24 to 48 hours. But Iran is a huge country. It's I think 3 times larger than Iraq. The population of Iran is actually well over 3 times what a population of Iraq was when we invaded them in 2003. And they likely have nuclear weapons. So there's not been a case in history that I'm aware of, other than the possible exception of the war against Yugoslavia or Serbia and Montenegro that we fought in 1999, where a bombing campaign alone was successful in overthrowing a regime. We tried that with Syria, it didn't work. Libya, we had bombing strikes, but the bombing strikes really didn't overthrow the regime. It was the insurgent forces and the Islamist forces we were backing on the ground, the Al-Qaeda forces that we backed both in Kosovo and Libya. Kosovo, of course, narco-terrorist forces that we backed very strongly, helping them to, carve out their own country in Kosovo. We fight Al-Qaeda sometimes when it's convenient for us. We fight Al-Qaeda, we fight the Islamists. Other times we back the Islamists. Just, there's no real moral, there's no real moral basis or consistency with U.S. foreign policy. It's whatever the president defines at the time that they claim is what is in the U.S. national security interest. That's I used to head up think tank called the Center for the National Security Interests, because I think that should define what we do. But my definition of the U.S. national security interest is very different from deep state globalists. Globalists believe that they claim the entire world except for Russia and China, the Sino-Russian alliance, as the U.S. sphere of influence. So any country in the world, basically 160 different countries, constitute our sphere of influence and our national security interests. I would define it much more narrowly.
Anything else that you want to cover internet? Actually, I want your thoughts on what we're doing with taking the oil tankers. I think I know, but I want your thoughts on taking the oil tankers, what we're doing with Cuba, and some of the threats that we've made to Mexico.
Well, I think it's it just proves Trump's line when he says that we control Venezuela, and Pete Hegseth and Rubio are now the leaders of their new junta, or whatever their transition government, proconsuls or whatever of Venezuela, ruling Venezuela in place of the Maduro regime, that we're still blockading the country. If you don't blockade a country that you control, a territory you control. So obviously, if we're blockading them, they're still an enemy. They're still controlled by an enemy regime, and they're not doing what we want them to do. If they were doing everything we wanted them to do, we wouldn't be blockading. We'd probably be aiding them. We'd probably be rebuilding Venezuela, like Trump has talked about his desire to rebuild and modernize Venezuela's oil industries. So that in itself proves that he's not being truthful with the American people. Now, in terms of the U.S. capture of the tankers, I mean, I think there's been one or two, Russian shadow fleet tankers that we've captured that are clearly Russian ships. One of which was captured off the coast of Scotland. Tried to run the blockade, it failed, so it took off back to Russia, trying to get to, I don't know, Murmansk or somewhere in the Bering Sea, I think. We intercepted it. We chased it down, and some people said that it. I heard a claim that there was some kind of clandestine reason for that. I'm not sure what it was. Maybe, just things that I don't believe. So, there's no legitimate reason that I can see for doing that. I mean, that's certainly an active war against the Russian Federation. They reportedly had a nuclear armed submarine in the region, in the vicinity of the tanker when it was captured. So, again, another example of Trump risking World War III for no apparent reason. He claimed that we were unloading the oil in the tanker, but the fact is it had no oil. It had no oil because it had been dispatched from Iran to Venezuela to pick up oil to sell from Venezuela, to get hard cash, I guess, for the Maduro regime. But it was unsuccessful. So, Trump lied about downloading the oil. He said that Venezuela had given up, for free. It gave the U.S., 30 to 50 million barrels of oil. So the U.S. was incorporating that into our strategic petroleum reserves, or something absurd of that nature. There's, I've seen no factual evidence that that's the case. So again, when Trump keeps lying about all these different things, especially Venezuela, it just makes me question everything else he's doing. Because he's, and he could have been forthright with the American people. He could have said, look, Maduro is a communist dictator. We support, we hate communism. We're trying to liberate them. Instead, he made up this thing about, Maduro is a drug lord, made up a fake cartel that never existed in the history of the world. Cartel del Solis or something like that. That was kind of just a term made up by the opposition
sounds like someone sold on that specific thing. Sounds like someone sold Trump a load of hooey, and Trump needs to get rid of them.
Well, I think Trump encouraged them to, come up with, it was the same
Come up
reason.
with a reason, yes.
Yeah, it was the same thing with Bush and Iraq. Bush decided on September 20th of 2001 he was going to invade Iraq, and then he said, "Okay, we don't have a reason to invade except that I want to. and I want to, one up my dad because he failed to get rid of Saddam. So you guys make up the reasons. We'll have a PR campaign. We'll mislead Congress. We'll make up fake intelligence, and then we'll get rid of him. And then we'll win, and then we'll pull out, and Iraq will be a beacon of democracy in the Middle East. And we saw that worked out. We lost way too many, thousands of U.S. troops unnecessarily, tens of thousands to suicide, and severely wounded, broken families, and a million Christians. According to J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States, 1 million Christians died because of Bush's invasion of Iraq. So that's the kind of carnage that have been wreaked by U.S. military actions in the recent past. And I've been saying for a while that most U.S. military interventions in recent history, probably going back, and certainly going back to World War I, have actually made the world less safe and the U.S. less secure than it would have been had we not intervened.
Okay, last thing I want to hit on the domestic front, Minnesota. What are your thoughts there?
Well, I think President Trump is doing a great job deploying, ICE. He needs to deploy more ICE forces, perhaps even National Guard troops. I mean, the rioters are disgraceful. I mean, they're just extremists. They're domestic terrorists. Obviously, it was very lamentable that woman, the domestic terrorist lady, lost her life when she tried to run over the cop. Clearly, she wasn't trying to kill him, but she did significantly injure him. He was hospitalized with a major hip injury and walking with a major limp. And you just don't do that when you have armed police ordering you to get out of the car because you've been blocking traffic and interfering with federal law enforcement for at least over 4 hours. You just don't act like that. You comply with the orders, or you risk getting shot. And there's a lot of criminals have gotten shot that way and have been killed. So,
well, the bottom line is she did create contact with the ICE agent. She created the contact. Now, she might have been trying to get away, but some claim she was trying to get away. Bottom line is you hit a ICE agent, you hit a law enforcement agent, there's a good chance, unfortunately, it's going to cost you your life.
Yeah, and Governor Tim Walz has been really disgraceful as well, as has the mayor of Minneapolis. Just radical extremists really trying to inflame the protesters, encouraging them to incite more violence against federal law enforcement. So really, they're the ones to blame.
They're doing it. They're doing it to keep
her
the heat off of them.
Yeah, Waltz, as you mentioned, there's a $9 billion Somali, school corruption deal, or daycare, I guess.
Adult care, daycare, and delivery, driving of adults, medical. Let's see, I think it's non-emergency medical delivery or something like that. There's over $9 billion, and this is my instincts, David. This is my instincts. They're getting kickbacks. The Democrat Party is getting kickbacks. That specific, in fact, the mayor's wife is a lobbyist, and she is obviously getting money for being a lobbyist. 1, 2, I guarantee you Tim Walz is getting money from this. And I'm sure you remember about a year ago there was a guy that went and shot that had been connected to Tim Walz, had been one of his I don't know if you would say in his inner circle, but definitely within his election campaign, that went and shot 2 state representatives. Come to find out, both of those state representatives, who happen to be Democrat, if I remember correctly, voted against these Somali fraud schemes. They voted against it. So, am I drawing a conclusion? Possibly. Am I grasping at straws? I'd be fine to be called out on that. But the bottom line is, I I think there is a ton of fraud that's going on in Minnesota, and as soon as that happened, the Democrat Main Street media said we need to turn up the heat, or otherwise, and we need to make the ICE agents look as the bad guy. Otherwise, this fraud issue we now know is in I think it's either Iowa or Ohio. I think it's in Ohio and it's in California. Similar fraud is going on, and this is going to spread across the United States. I bet you it's in other states as well. And they're like, we've got to do everything we can to make Donald Trump look bad, or else we're going to get the finger put on us. And I think Donald Trump needs to get really good on handling this. Donald Trump and his administration needs to get really good at handling this, because I actually think this can save the midterms. Sorry, those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I agree. I think Governor Tim Walz is massively corrupt. And reports are that there was a whistleblower that identified and warned him about the Somali 9 billion fraud operation, the daycare operation, and he looked the other way because, of course, the official Democrat policy, or I guess unofficial Democrat policy, is to give illegals as much money as possible, as many benefits, so that they'll stay here. And of course, we know that 85 to 90% of them vote Democrat, of illegal aliens. So, of course, they want to, they're not supposed to vote, but they do anyway, and by the millions.
Right.
So they try to make it just enough illegal votes so they can steal the elections, even without other fraud, just by illegal voting by itself. So that's, it's ultimately a vote stealing operation. That's the rationale for Walz's decision to allow the multi-billion-dollar fraud scheme to go on.
Any last thoughts that you want to share before we go?
Well, I think probably the one thing we didn't talk about a whole lot is what you mentioned at the beginning, and that was, what are the predictions for 2026? I think that in terms of Taiwan, I think that if we make a move, if we go to war against Iran, I think the Taiwan invasion timetable goes way up. If Trump were to attack Iran, for example, next month, maybe for a period of weeks, I think that would be a green light for Taiwan to get invaded by China or blockaded. In terms of, but otherwise, I think they'll probably wait till next year. I'm a lot more, I guess, optimistic than I used to be, thinking
Why?
it was imminent. Well, because I think they had kind of a grand opportunity to do it before Trump took office. I think probably the biggest window of vulnerability was towards the very end of the Biden administration, when they knew Trump was going to be in the White House. Although, let me just walk that back a little bit. I think they deliberately waited for Trump to become president, because I think they know that, unlike Biden, Trump is extremely unlikely to go to war to defend Taiwan. He has a much better understanding, at least instinctively, in theory, about avoiding a direct war with Russia or China, even though he certainly provoked war with Russia in terms of his actions in helping Ukraine. He was supposed to sign a new Ukraine security deal where the U.S. would provide even more security guarantees than even Biden was willing to do, in addition to an $800 billion reconstruction agreement. And so
I haven't seen anything come across Twitter on that yet.
Well, it was canceled. It was postponed because Zelensky
Okay.
was advised to wait until the WC Forum, World Economic Forum, to get that signed, which I think is in a week or two. But so I think that's likely to be postponed. I think I've always said 2027 was the deadline. I think President Xi Jinping, he had a summit meeting with President Trump in South Korea on October 31st. And I think Trump made some major concessions to him in terms of saying that he would oppose Taiwanese independence moves and perhaps even suspend U.S. military aid in deference to President Xi, China being kind of the dominant superpower in the region. So I think that placated Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping was smiling at the end of the meeting, indicating to me, that he was genuinely happy with the concessions that Trump made behind the scenes that were not widely reported. So I think that postpones military conflict, because I think that Xi is hopeful that that Trump will actually be willing to negotiate some kind of deal that's short of unification, but really just kind of leaves Taiwan in the lurch, essentially to more under China's sphere of influence. I think Iran
is Xi losing power? I've heard different pundits that are saying Xi's starting to lose power. No, and you're shaking no. So okay.
Yeah, Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, they've never been more strongly, in power in terms of their hold on power than they are today. And at least with regards to Russia, it's because of Biden's war in Ukraine. But I think that the main threat right now to U.S. national security is Iran. We continue to have, President Trump reportedly just a few days ago called off military strikes on Iran because U.S. national security officials could not guarantee that U.S. even a sustained bombing campaign lasting a month or more could achieve regime change in Iran. Of course, we know it wouldn't. So that at least was hopeful. But I still haven't seen a pullback of U.S. military forces from Iran. And to my knowledge, the U.S. Carrier Strike Group with the Abraham Lincoln is still en route to the Indian Ocean. And that alone wouldn't be alarming because there typically is a carrier in that region, or oftentimes is. But, the forward deployed B-2s and I'm not sure if they're B-2s, but there are other strategic assets there that are, in terms of refueling aircraft. There's an air refueling bridge that could be used to refuel the B-2s to conduct that bombing campaign all over again. And coincidentally, I spoke to a B-2 pilot today about that, former B-2 colonel.
What did he have to say?
He said that the B-2s they've actually had that the strike plan available for 20 years. So that the Fordo strike plan, where they went in and tried to take out those 3 Iranian nuclear sites, they've had it for 20 years. So that just shows you how long Iran has been working on their nuclear program. 20 years ago, of course, was January of 2005. We're in the middle of war with Iraq, a non-nuclear country, while Iran was succeeding in building up their, getting to what I believe a modest-sized nuclear arsenal, while Bush was appeasing them.
Any other thoughts?
No, I think we've covered it. I guess I would just ask all of your viewers to pray for peace and support. Call on your congressional representatives to support peace. There's so many of our Republicans that have betrayed, America First conservatism, because that's what Trump's doing. Trump's, betraying America First conservatives with all of his actions with regards to, Russia and Ukraine, to, a limited extent in Venezuela. I think he's pursuing America First in Greenland. I strongly support everything he's doing in Greenland. I'm happy about. But Iran, I think, is the main worry that I have right now. And if we have strikes on Iran, I'm turning up my Tesla Powerwall to 100% because I don't want to be caught without power.
Well, with that, I'm going to say David Pine. Folks, to the audience, please go visit David Pine at the EMP task force of the EMP task force. Please go to his Substack at dpyne.substack.com. Please go. David Pine's got great information. He puts out great articles, in-depth articles. So David, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on today. I appreciate you being here. I'll say goodbye to you offline, but folks, this has been Talk with Jon.